The sun was rising over the open fields when a cowboy named Mark stepped out of his small wooden cabin with a slow breath and a stretch, and next to him stood his loyal dog Rocco, wagging his tail with steady excitement, because today felt different in a way Mark could not explain, even though the day looked peaceful and quiet around the ranch. For the last 3 weeks Rocco had been acting strange for reasons Mark could not understand, because the dog kept running toward the old waterfall near the North Ridge, and Mark had followed many times, but found nothing except cold mist and slipping stones and the steady sound of falling water that never changed. Rocco barked again that morning and stood near the fence looking toward the ridge like he was trying to tell Mark something important, and Mark gave a small nod because he had learned years ago that animals rarely behave without reason, and Rocco was not the kind of dog who wasted energy or acted without purpose. Mark saddled his horse slowly and kept glancing at the dog, who paced in tight circles in the dust, sending small clouds up as he moved, and Mark felt a strange pull in his chest because something about today felt heavier than before, as if the air around them was full of a quiet message waiting to be heard. The path to the waterfall was narrow and rough, and the morning air carried a cold wind from the mountains, but Rocco stayed ahead the whole time, moving with speed and confidence, even though Mark still had no idea why the dog wanted to return again and again. When they reached the clearing, the waterfall roared with its usual power, sending white foam down the rocks, and Rocco ran straight to the edge, then stopped, and looked back at Mark with a sharp, alert gaze that made Mark slow down and study the dog carefully. Mark stepped closer and noticed that Rocco was sniffing the thick brush on the right side of the falls, and the dog pressed his nose into the leaves, then backed up, then pushed forward again, as if urging Mark to follow, and Mark felt his heartbeat rise with a soft mix of caution and curiosity. He pushed the leaves aside and noticed a thin gap behind the heavy curtain of water, and he stepped back in surprise because in all his years riding across this land he had never seen anything behind the waterfall, and he had never thought there could be a hidden space there at all. Rocco barked again, not loud but strong like a command, and Mark understood that he needed to look closer, so he lowered himself near the rocks and studied the water as it crashed down in front of the narrow opening that seemed almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. He could feel a cold spray against his skin as he leaned in, and he reached his hand through the falling water to test the space behind it, and to his surprise there was open air, a clear hollow space large enough for a person to slip through if they crouched and moved with slow care. Rocco darted through the curtain, first making Mark call after him with sudden concern because the dog disappeared into the darkness behind the water, and for a moment Mark felt a sharp fear rise inside his chest, even though he knew Rocco had survived far more dangerous places before. Mark followed him and stepped through the heavy water and entered the hidden space behind the falls, and the sound changed around him at once because inside the cave everything felt quieter and deeper, and the air smelled old, like earth that had never seen the light of day. The cave was dim, but he could see a narrow tunnel leading deeper, and Rocco stood there wagging his tail fast, but also watching the darkness with full focus as if something inside was calling him, and Mark felt a strange cold wave pass through him because he sensed the same pull. He touched the cave wall with his hand, and felt smooth stone and faint lines carved across the surface, lines that did not look like natural cracks, but like symbols or markings made by someone long ago, someone who had stood in the same place with purpose. Rocco let out a soft whine and moved deeper into the tunnel, and Mark followed with slow steps because every part of his mind told him there was something important hidden in this cave, something he should have found long ago, something Rocco had been trying to show him from the beginning. As Mark walked deeper he felt the air grow warmer, and he noticed a soft glow ahead, not bright, but steady like light coming from behind a rock, or from something alive, and he held his breath without thinking because the glow did not look natural, and the cave around him felt too quiet. Rocco reached the glowing area first and sat down waiting for Mark with calm patience, and Mark stepped forward and saw that the light was coming from an open chamber at the end of the tunnel, and he could see shapes on the walls, shapes that looked like drawings or old messages left by someone who had lived through something important. Mark stepped into the chamber and felt the air shift around him, and for the first time in his life he felt like he had walked into a place that had been waiting for him for many years, and he knew that whatever secret was hidden here, it was not just a simple discovery. It was something that would change everything. Mark stood inside the glowing chamber with his breath held tight in his chest, and Rocco stayed close to his leg, watching the golden light that spread across the walls with a steady pulse like a heartbeat, and the chamber felt old yet alive, like it had been waiting through long silent years for someone to step inside and see what had been hidden in the dark all this time, and Mark felt a strange weight settle on his shoulders, because he did not understand why this place existed, or why his dog had been so determined to bring him here again and again, and he took a slow step forward, feeling the floor shift beneath his boots as he studied the carvings spread across the rock, because the drawings were not random or careless but careful and detailed, showing a group of people standing near the same waterfall from outside, but these people wore old clothes that looked like something from a forgotten tribe that once lived in this land, and Mark traced his hand across one carving where a tall figure held a lantern and pointed toward a cave that looked exactly like the one he now stood in, and he felt a warm tremble run through his fingers because the carving looked like a message left for someone who would discover it later, and he wondered if that someone was him. Even though he had never believed in legends or secret paths, he moved his hand lower and found another carving that showed the same tribe gathered around something round and bright, something that looked like a stone, but it glowed in the drawing with the same warm light filling the chamber now, and Mark stared at it with confusion because he had never heard of glowing stones hidden in caves, and he looked around hoping to find something real, and not just carved pictures. Rocco barked softly, and stepped toward a raised part of the floor where dust gathered in a thick layer, but there was a faint shine underneath, like something smooth was buried just below the surface, and Mark knelt down, brushing the dust aside with his fingers until a smooth, curved object revealed itself, and he could feel warm air rising from it, even though there was no fire, no lamp, no lantern nearby. He lifted the object slowly, and found that it was a round stone the size of his hand, glowing with the same golden light that covered the walls, and the moment he held it the chamber shook with a soft rumble, as if the cave had taken a deep breath. After years of silence, Mark stood quickly, gripping the stone with caution because he did not know what power it held or what it meant, but Rocco stayed calm, which gave Mark enough courage to keep going, and he studied the stone, turning it gently, seeing more carvings on its surface, carvings that matched the symbols on the walls, and he could feel that this stone had been placed here with intention and care, like it was meant to be found, but only when the right person arrived. He tried to think clearly, but a warm hum began to rise from the stone, filling the chamber with a soft note that vibrated through the air, and he stepped back in surprise because he could feel it through his arm and across his chest, like the stone was reacting to him personally, not to the cave or the air or the world outside, but to him. And only him. Rocco stepped forward, pressed his nose gently against the stone, and Mark watched as the light pulsed brighter for a moment, then softened again, and he understood that Rocco had known about this place for a long time, guided by instinct or memory or something deeper that humans could not sense. Mark walked around the chamber, searching for any sign of danger because he did not want to carry a glowing stone out of a hidden cave without understanding what it meant. But as he looked around the walls, he noticed more carvings that showed the tribe walking away from the cave, leaving the stone behind, and the final drawing showed one lone figure returning to take the stone with him, and this figure looked strong, and also calm, like someone chosen for a responsibility. Mark did not know what kind of responsibility it might be, but he rubbed his thumb along the carvings on the stone, feeling a quiet heat rise from it, and he sensed that the object was not harmful but important, and he stared at Rocco, who stood ready to follow him just as he always had, and Mark felt a growing certainty inside his chest that leaving the stone inside the cave was no longer an option. He stepped toward the tunnel with the stone in hand, and Rocco ran ahead, guiding him back toward the entrance, and the air in the tunnel felt warmer than before, almost comfortable, as if the cave itself acknowledged that its long-kept secret was finally leaving. And when Mark stepped back through the curtain of falling water into the bright daylight, the stone glowed even stronger, sending golden light across his hands, and the mist around him sparkled with bright flashes that made the entire waterfall glow. In return, Mark stood there in silence, trying to understand what he was supposed to do next, because carrying an ancient glowing stone out of a hidden cave was not something he had ever imagined in his simple ranch life, but he felt that he needed answers, and the only person who might know something was an old historian named Luis, who lived a few miles south near the edge of the open plains, because Luis had spent years collecting stories about forgotten tribes and hidden trails, and Mark realized this discovery was far beyond something he could understand alone. Mark mounted his horse with careful steps, placing the glowing stone inside a thick saddlebag, while Rocco stayed close, running in quick, excited circles like he understood that something important had changed, and Mark held the reins steady, feeling the heat of the sun mix with the warm pulse of the stone through the leather bag, and as he rode toward the plains, he felt a new sense of purpose rising inside him, because whatever he had found in that hidden chamber was not an accident, and someone in the past had left it behind for a reason, and he needed to find that reason. Before anything else happened, Mark rode across the wide open plains with the warm wind brushing against his face, and Rocco ran beside the horse with steady energy, as if the journey filled him with a sense of purpose, and Mark kept his hand near the saddlebag, because he could feel the faint warmth of the glowing stone pulsing through the leather like a living heartbeat, and the strange rhythm made him feel both cautious and curious at the same time, because nothing in his life had ever carried this kind of mystery before, and he wondered what the old historian Luis would say when he saw something that no one had spoken about in generations. Mark reached the small cottage near the dry riverbed, where Luis lived, surrounded by old maps and dusty books and forgotten tools, and Luis stepped out of the door with slow, steady movements, his gray hair tangled from the wind, and his eyes sharp, as if waiting for a problem to reveal itself, and he studied Mark with quiet curiosity, because Mark rarely traveled this far unless something serious had happened. Mark opened the saddlebag and brought out the glowing stone, holding it carefully with both hands, and Luis took a slow breath as the light reflected across his weathered face, and he stepped closer with a mix of fear and fascination, because he had spent his entire life searching for proof of the ancient tribe that lived beyond the mountains, and now Mark was holding something that looked like it came directly from the stories that had filled his old notebooks. Luis asked where Mark had found it, and Mark explained everything from Rocco's strange behavior to the hidden cave behind the waterfall, and the glowing chamber filled with old carvings, and Luis listened without interrupting, because each part matched the tales he had studied for many years, and after a long moment Luis said that the stone was called a heart stone in the stories, and the ancient tribe believed that each stone held the memory of their people and the strength of the land itself. Mark felt a cold wave pass through him, because he did not understand how a stone could hold memory or strength, but Luis said the tribe had believed the stones were sacred, and only a chosen person could remove one from its resting place without bringing harm to the land. Luis studied the carvings across the stone surface, running his fingers gently across them, and he explained that these markings were a map, but also a message left behind for the one who would carry the stone in the future. And Mark stared at the stone, stunned, because he had never felt important or chosen in any way. He lived a quiet life on his ranch, and worked with his hands, and kept to himself, but Luis said that sometimes the land chooses the quietest souls because they carry a stronger kind of courage, one that does not need pride or loud words to survive. Luis told him that the carvings described a second location, another hidden place connected to the first cave, and Mark felt his heart tighten, because he realized the journey was not over, and maybe not even close to ending, and Luis said that the second place held a truth about the tribe, a truth they buried to keep safe from danger long ago. But Luis warned Mark that carrying the stone would invite attention, not from people of today, but from the land itself, because the stone was tied to old forces that still watched the world, even in silence. Mark did not know what that meant, but he felt the weight of the stone grow heavier in his hands, and he realized that turning away from this path was no longer possible, because Rocco had pushed him toward it for a reason, and the cave had opened for him alone, and the stone had reacted to his touch as if it knew him already. Luis pointed to the carvings and traced a small symbol that looked like waves beside a mountain ridge, and he explained that the symbol meant a place where water meets stone, not a river, not a lake, but a deep canyon with a narrow stream running between tall cliffs. And Mark knew exactly where that was, because he had ridden past that canyon many times and never thought it was anything more than a quiet, forgotten place where no one bothered to go. Luis said he should not travel alone, even with Rocco, because the canyon was known for sudden ground shifts and narrow ledges that could crumble under a single step, and Mark nodded, knowing he needed to prepare carefully before setting out on another dangerous trail. But something inside him felt pulled forward, like the stone itself was urging him toward the next step. Mark left the cottage with a grateful nod, and Luis watched him go with worried eyes, because he knew ancient stories rarely ended without some kind of trial along the way, and Rocco barked twice as if telling Mark to hurry, because time itself felt different now, as if the journey had already begun, even before Mark understood it. Mark rode back toward his ranch to gather supplies, and the sky shifted from bright blue to soft orange as the sun lowered behind the hills, and the warm air turned cool and quiet as evening shadows stretched long across the land. And when he reached the ranch, he placed the glowing stone on a wooden table, and sat down in front of it, feeling a strange calm as the golden light filled the room like a quiet fire without heat. He tried to understand why he felt connected to a stone or a place or a tribe he had never heard of, but the more he thought, the more he realized that the stone did not feel foreign or strange, but familiar, like something he had been meant to find since childhood. Rocco climbed onto the small rug near Mark's feet, and let out a soft sigh, as if he knew the next day would bring a harder path, and Mark rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling grateful for the loyalty that never wavered. Mark packed a small bag with food, water, rope, a lantern, and a blanket, because he did not know how long the journey would take, and he placed the glowing stone inside a thick leather pouch tied tightly to keep it safe, and he sat beside the fireless hearth thinking about the carving that showed the lone figure who returned to take the stone, and he wondered if that person had felt the same heavy mix of fear and purpose that he felt now. Night fell across the ranch and Mark tried to sleep, but the stone glowed gently beside him, and he felt its light through his eyelids, calling to him with a soft rhythm that kept his mind awake with questions and quiet thoughts. And when morning came, he rose before dawn and stepped outside into the cool blue light, and Rocco stood ready, his tail lifted and ears forward, waiting for Mark to start the journey. Mark mounted his horse and looked toward the distant line of cliffs where the canyon waited, and he felt the warm pulse of the stone through the pouch like a heartbeat guiding him forward, and he knew that whatever waited inside that canyon would change the path of his life forever. Mark rode toward the canyon with the early morning light stretching across the open land, and Rocco ran beside the horse with a steady rhythm that matched the beat of Mark's heart, and the air felt cooler than usual, carrying a faint scent of dust and stone, as if the land already knew he was coming and wanted to prepare him for what waited ahead. And Mark kept glancing at the leather pouch tied to his side, because the glowing stone gave off a warm pulse that grew stronger with each mile, as though guiding him toward the next hidden truth. And the closer he got to the canyon, the more he felt a sense of quiet pressure, like something beneath the earth was watching and waiting for his arrival. Mark reached the edge of the canyon just as the sun climbed above the ridges, and the tall cliffs cast long shadows across the narrow stream running at the bottom, and the path leading down was steep and rocky with loose stones that could slip with one wrong step. But Rocco moved with careful skill, sniffing the ground and checking each spot before Mark took his next step, and Mark felt grateful for the dog's instincts, because without Rocco the path would have felt far more dangerous. Mark guided the horse slowly down the slope until they reached the bottom, where the stream flowed with a soft whisper, and the air grew cooler and damp, and the sound echoed between the cliffs, creating a quiet hum that matched the pulse from the stone. And Mark felt the hum rising through the ground into his boots and up through his legs, like the canyon itself was alive. Rocco stopped suddenly and stared toward a narrow cut in the cliff wall on the left side where thick vines hung across the rock, and Mark followed the dog's gaze, feeling a small shiver as he noticed a faint golden glow behind the vines, almost hidden, almost impossible to see unless someone knew to look, and he realized the stone in the pouch was glowing brighter now, as if feeding its light into the vines. And Mark moved closer, pushing the vines aside, and revealing a small entrance carved into the wall, an entrance so old that parts of it had worn smooth from years of wind and water. Mark breathed in slowly, and entered the passage with Rocco close behind, and the air changed instantly, becoming warmer and filled with a faint earthy scent that felt both calming and ancient at the same time, and the passage opened into a long hall carved deep inside the cliff, with walls covered in symbols similar to those in the first cave, but these symbols were clearer, more detailed, and filled with small patterns that looked like stories flowing across the stone. Mark held the glowing stone in both hands, and the moment he lifted it, the walls lit up with a warm, golden light that traveled along the carvings, revealing scenes that told a story of the ancient tribe. And Mark watched with rising wonder as he walked deeper into the hall, because the carvings showed the tribe arriving at this canyon long ago, carrying several glowing stones much like the one he held, and they placed the stones in deep chambers to protect the land from something that looked like a great storm or force that threatened to destroy their home. And the carvings showed the tribe working together to seal the energy of the land into the stones and leaving them behind for future generations who might need their power. Mark felt another shiver run through him, because he could sense that the stone in his hands was not just a memory or a relic, but something alive with purpose. And Rocco walked beside him, ears alert, tail raised, as if he felt the same energy flowing through the hall. Mark reached the end of the hall where a large chamber opened before him, and inside the chamber stood a raised stone platform with deep grooves carved around the edges and small symbols that matched the markings on the stone he carried. And at the center of the platform lay another stone larger than the one he held, and shaped like a heart, with a dull dark surface that looked like it had lost its glow long ago. Mark stepped closer, trying to understand why this second stone was here, and why it seemed lifeless, and he felt the warm pulse in his own stone increase until it felt like a steady heartbeat against his palm, and he realized the two stones were connected. Rocco barked once, as if urging Mark forward, and Mark lifted his stone toward the larger dark stone, and the warm light grew brighter, filling the chamber with a golden glow that made the air shimmer, and the dull stone on the platform trembled with a faint sound like a quiet breath waking from sleep. Mark hesitated, unsure if he should place his stone onto the platform, but the carvings on the walls showed the same action, a figure holding a glowing stone bringing it to a dark one to restore its light, and Mark understood that the tribe had left this task for whoever found the first stone, and followed the path. He took a deep calming breath, and placed the glowing stone gently onto the groove carved in the top of the dark stone, and the moment the stones touched a wave of warm light burst outward, filling the chamber with a steady, golden radiance that made the air feel alive, and Mark felt the ground shake gently beneath his feet, but not with danger, more like the land itself was stretching after a long rest. Rocco stood firm, watching closely as the dark stone absorbed the light, and slowly began to glow on its own, and the carvings on its surface lit up one by one, revealing symbols that looked like warnings, but also like promises of protection, and Mark felt a calm rise through him because he sensed that he had awakened something important, something meant to keep the land safe. Luis had said the stones held memory and strength, and now Mark understood those words with new clarity because he felt the energy of the lit stone move through the chamber like a warm breeze, filling every corner with quiet power. The light slowly faded until both stones settled into a soft, steady glow, and Mark touched the newly awakened stone, feeling a calm warmth spread into his hand and up his arm, and he sensed that the land was grateful, and the canyon felt different now, lighter, safer, and filled with quiet peace. Mark lifted both stones, feeling their combined weight heavier, but also comforting, and he turned to leave the chamber with Rocco leading the way, and as they stepped back into the long hall, the carvings on the walls shimmered with soft light, as if saying farewell or thank you, and Mark realized that the ancient tribe had designed this place with care, trusting the future to hands they would never meet. When Mark stepped back outside into the canyon, the sky was bright with afternoon sunlight, and the cliffs echoed softly with the sound of the stream, and he felt a deep calm settle over him because the land no longer felt tense or watchful, and the warm glow from the stones had softened to a gentle pulse that felt like a slow heartbeat guiding him home. Mark mounted his horse and rode toward the open plains with Rocco running beside him, and he knew that one final truth still waited ahead because the stones had awakened something old and powerful, and he needed to understand what the ancient tribe wanted him to do next. Mark rode across the plains with the glowing stones resting safely inside the leather pouch, and the warm pulse from them rose and fell like a slow heartbeat guiding him forward, even though he did not know where the final part of his journey would lead. And Rocco ran beside the horse with steady steps, ears lifted, tail swaying with quiet confidence, as if he already sensed the direction they needed to follow, and the sky above them stretched wide and clear with a soft orange shine from the sinking sun, and everything felt still yet full of quiet intention, and Mark felt a strange pull inside his chest, a gentle nudge like the stones were reaching out to something far ahead, calling him toward a final place that waited for him alone. And as he rode farther, the plains slowly rose into soft hills, and the air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of pine leaves and dry soil, and Mark noticed that the stones grew warmer each time he passed a tall tree or an ancient rock, as if the land was responding to their energy and offering quiet guidance. And after a while, he reached a place he had not visited in many years, a ridge overlooking a wide valley where the land formed a natural circle of stones weathered by time, but still standing strong like silent guardians watching the earth. Mark had known this place since childhood, though he never understood why it felt sacred even then. And now as he approached the circle, the warm pulse from the stones grew stronger until it felt like a soft drumbeat against his ribs, and Rocco stopped at the entrance of the stone circle, lowering his head with a quiet hum, as if showing respect to something older than both of them combined. Mark stepped inside the circle, holding the stones close, and the ground beneath him seemed to hum with gentle energy, and the tall sky above him felt wider, brighter, as if the entire valley had been waiting for this moment for many generations. And in the center of the circle stood a flat stone platform carved with faint markings that matched the symbols on the stones, and Mark felt a quiet tremble move through him because he realized this was the final destination, the last place the ancient tribe had marked for him to find. He walked slowly to the platform and placed both glowing stones at its center, and the moment he did, the ground beneath the circle shifted with a gentle, deep sound like the land taking a slow breath after many years of silence, and golden light spread across the carvings on the platform, flowing outward along the earth like streams of warm rivers, weaving between the circle stones and rising into the air in thin, soft beams that shimmered like sunlight passing through water. Mark stepped back with wide eyes, watching the light rise higher, and Rocco stayed close, his tail still but his body calm, as if he understood this was a moment of peace, not danger. The beams of light joined together above the platform, forming a soft golden cloud that swirled in the air with a gentle rhythm, and Mark saw something moving inside the cloud, faint outlines of figures shaped like the ancient tribe, tall, strong, peaceful, their forms made of warm light, and he felt the hair on his arms rise with awe, not fear, because the figures did not feel threatening. They felt calm, like guardians or memories given shape. One of the glowing figures lowered its head, as if acknowledging Mark, and stepped forward until it stood only a few breaths away from him, and Mark felt a warm wave move through his chest as the figure raised a hand made of pure golden light and touched his shoulder gently. The light spread through him, filling him with calm strength and a deep understanding that did not come from words but from feeling alone. And Mark sensed something important inside the touch, a message from the ancient tribe, a message of trust and gratitude, as if they had waited many generations for someone with a steady heart to awaken the stones and restore balance to the land. The glowing figure stepped back, and the cloud of light began to dissolve into soft sparks drifting into the sky one by one like tiny stars rising toward the fading sunlight, and the carvings on the ground dimmed to a gentle warm shine until they finally settled into still quiet earth, and the stones on the platform stopped glowing, but they remained warm and full of quiet strength, as if their purpose had been completed. Mark stood there in silence, overwhelmed by what he had witnessed, because he understood now that the ancient tribe had trusted him with their memory and their power, because he carried a calm, steady spirit, and because he listened to the land even when he did not know he was listening. Rocco nudged his hand softly, bringing him back to the present, and Mark knelt down, placing both hands on the dog's head, feeling grateful for the loyalty that had guided him from the very beginning, because without Rocco none of this would have happened. The dog had sensed the hidden caves, the glowing stones, and the silent call from the land long before Mark understood any of it, and Mark realized that the bond between them had been the key that opened the path. He lifted the stones again and felt their quiet warmth, no longer pulsing but steady like a peaceful memory. And he knew they were meant to be kept safe, not hidden away, but protected, so their story would not fade again. Mark placed the stones inside his saddlebags and stepped out of the circle of ancient stones, with Rocco walking proudly beside him, and the valley behind them felt lighter, calmer, filled with a gentle peace that had been missing for many years. Mark mounted his horse and looked once more at the ridge, knowing that the land would remain safe for a long time because the stones had been awakened, and the balance had been restored. He rode back toward his ranch with the evening breeze brushing across his face, and Rocco kept pace with strong, steady steps as the sky shifted from orange to soft blue, and then to deep, calm night. Mark felt a sense of fulfillment growing inside him, not loud or triumphant, but warm and steady, a quiet pride in knowing he had done what the land needed, and what the ancient tribe had trusted him to do. He returned to his cabin and placed the stones on a wooden shelf near the window, where the moonlight fell gently upon them, making their carvings glow faintly like soft memories resting in peace. And Rocco curled up near Mark's feet, letting out a tired but content breath, and Mark sat beside the stones, feeling the calm night settle around him, knowing his life would never be the same. And even though the journey had ended, he felt that something new had begun, a deeper connection to the land, to the past, and to the loyal dog who had guided him through every step.